The maid was about to be fired, but when the millionaire discovered that she was taking care of her sick brother alone, he did something that changed their lives. The shrill sound of the alarm clock cut through the silence of the small apartment in Queens Tower, New York. Sofia Ramirez opened her eyes reluctantly, her tired body protesting the start of another long day. With a sigh, she stood up, knowing she had no choice. Her younger brother Marco depended on her. As she tidied herself up in the tiny bathroom, Sofia looked at her reflection in the tarnished mirror. Her brown eyes, once full of dreams and hope, now looked tired and worried. At 28, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Marco, are you awake yet?" she called, knocking softly on the door of the next room. A muffled groan was the only answer. Sofia entered, finding her 22-year-old brother curled up in bed, trembling slightly. "How are you feeling today?" Marco tried to smile, but the pain was evident on his pale face. "I'm fine, Sophie. Don't worry." Sofia knew he was lying. Marco's cystic fibrosis had worsened over the last few months, and the costs of treatment were piling up fast. She stroked her brother's dark hair, feeling a mixture of love and concern. "I'll prepare your breakfast and the medicines. Get some more rest." In the cramped kitchen, Sofia prepared a simple meal while her mind raced. The rent was overdue, the medical bills were piling up, and her job as a maid at the Holloway mansion barely covered basic expenses. She knew she was hanging by a thread at work. Her boss, Mrs. Holloway, made no secret of her dissatisfaction with what she called Sofia's lack of attention to detail. With one last look at Marco, who was now sleeping peacefully, Sofia left the apartment. The subway was as crowded as ever, and she squeezed in between the passengers, feeling the weight of her worries grow with each station. The Holloway mansion was a world apart. Located in an elegant neighborhood of Manhattan, the imposing three-story structure seemed to mock Sofia's modest existence. She entered through the back door as usual, exchanging a quick wave with the gardener. "Sofia!" Mrs. Holloway's shrill voice greeted her as soon as she stepped into the spotless kitchen. "You've finally arrived. We have a lot of work to do today. Mr. Holloway is returning from a business trip and I want everything perfect." Sofia nodded, swallowing. "Yes, ma'am. I'll get started right away." The next few hours were a blur of cleaning, polishing, and tidying. Sofia moved from room to room, her body on autopilot, as her mind wandered to Marco and his financial worries. It was during a pause for breath that she heard voices coming from Mr. Holloway's office. "We can't go on like this, Charles." Mrs. Holloway's voice sounded irritated. "The maid, Sofia, she's simply not up to it. I think we should fire her." Sofia's heart stopped. She knew she shouldn't listen, but her feet seemed stuck to the floor. "Calm down, dear," Mr. Holloway's deep voice replied. "We'll discuss this later. Right now, I need to concentrate on this new project. It could be the turning point our company needs." Sofia walked away silently, her world falling apart. Losing this job would be catastrophic. How would she look after Marco? How would they pay the rent? The rest of the day passed in a fog of anxiety. Sofia cleaned and organized mechanically, her heart heavy with the fear of the future. She was so distracted that she didn't notice Mr. Holloway watching her from the hallway. Charles Holloway, a man in his 50s with gray hair and piercing blue eyes, had noticed something different about Sofia recently. The young woman who was always so efficient and smiling seemed preoccupied and distracted. Her curiosity was aroused. Just as Sofia was about to leave, he called her into his office. "Sofia, could you come here for a moment?" Her heart raced. Was this it? Was she going to be fired now? With trembling legs, Sofia entered the luxurious office. "Sit down, please," said Mr. Holloway, indicating a leather chair. "Sofia, you've been working for us for almost 3 years, right?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've always been an exemplary employee," he continued, his eyes studying her intently. "But lately, I've noticed that you seem worried. Is something wrong?" The gentleness in his voice took Sofia by surprise. Before she could stop herself, the words poured out. "Mr. Holloway, I'm sorry if my work hasn't been satisfactory. I promise I'll try harder. Please, I really need this job. My brother, he's ill and—" She stopped, realizing she had said too much. Mr. Holloway leaned forward, his interest visibly aroused. "Your brother is ill. Tell me more about it, Sophia." And so, to her own surprise, Sophia found herself telling Mr. Holloway everything. About Marco and his fight against cystic fibrosis, about the mounting medical bills, about her constant fear of not being able to look after her brother properly. Charles Holloway listened in silence, his face a mask of concentration. When Sophia had finished, unshed tears glistening in her eyes, he stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. "Sophia," he finally said, turning to face her. "You're not going to lose your job." The relief that flooded Sophia was almost painful. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway. I promise I will." He held up a hand, interrupting her. "Actually, I'd like to do more than just keep your job. Sophia, I admire your dedication to your brother. It reminded me of— Well, that doesn't matter now. What matters is that I want to help." Sophia blinked, confused. "Help? Yes," Charles smiled, a warm smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I have connections with some of the best hospitals in the city. I'd like to organize a consultation for your brother with a specialist in cystic fibrosis, at no cost to you, of course." Sophia was speechless. It was as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Mr. Holloway, I don't know what to say. It's incredible, but I can't accept it." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "Consider it a bonus for your hard work over the years." "And Sophia? From now on, if you need time off to look after your brother, just let me know. Your job will be safe." The tears that Sophia had been holding back finally overflowed. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." When Sophia left the Holloway mansion that night, the world seemed different. The weight on her shoulders had lifted, replaced by a spark of hope she hadn't felt for a long time. On the subway back home, Sophia allowed herself, for the first time in months, to dream of a better future. A future where Marco was healthy, where she didn't have to worry constantly about money. A future that, thanks to Mr. Holloway's unexpected kindness, now seemed possible. As the train rolled through the city, Sophia smiled. Tomorrow would be a new day, a day of possibilities, and she couldn't wait to tell Marco the good news. The dawn in Queens brought a new energy to the Ramirez brothers' small apartment. Sophia woke up even before the alarm went off, her heart light with the possibilities the day promised. She got up quietly, not wanting to wake Marco so early. In the kitchen, while preparing breakfast, Sophia mentally rehearsed how she would tell her brother the news. Mr. Holloway's offer seemed almost unreal in the light of day, like a dream she was afraid to wake up from. "Sophie?" Marco's gruff voice surprised her. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, his eyes sleepy but curious. "You're smiling. What happened?" Sophia couldn't contain her excitement. Rushing to hug her brother, she began to speak rapidly. "Marco, you won't believe it. My boss, Mr. Holloway, he wants to help us. He's offered you a consultation with a cystic fibrosis specialist, free of charge." Marco sat still for a moment, processing the information. Then a hesitant smile appeared on his face. "Really? But why? How did it happen?" Sophia guided him to the kitchen table, pouring him a cup of tea as she recounted the events of the previous day. Marco listened intently, his eyes widening as the story unfolded. "Wow, Sophie, that's incredible," Marco finally said, his voice trembling slightly. "But are you sure? I mean, it sounds too good to be true." Sophia understood her brother's hesitation. After years of struggle and disappointment, it was hard to believe that luck was finally on their side. "I know, it sounds crazy, but Mr. Holloway seemed sincere. And honestly, Marco, what choice do we have? We have to try." Marco nodded slowly, a glimmer of hope lighting up his tired eyes. "You're right. When is the appointment?" "I don't know the details yet. I'll talk to Mr. Holloway today and find out everything," Sophia replied, checking her watch. Speaking of which, I need to hurry. I don't want to be late today." As she prepared to leave, Sophia noticed a subtle change in Marco. He seemed more animated, more present. It was as if the mere possibility of an improvement had injected new life into him. "Hey, Sophie," Marco called out as she was about to leave. "Thanks for everything." Sophia felt tears forming, but brushed them away with a smile. "We're a team, remember? I'll always be here for you." The drive to the Holloway mansion had never seemed so long. Sophia could hardly contain her anxiety to speak to Mr. Holloway and finalize the details of the appointment. When she finally arrived, she was greeted by an unusual atmosphere in the house. Mrs. Holloway, normally cold and distant, seemed agitated. "Sophia, I'm so glad you're here. Mr. Holloway wants to see you in his office right away." Intrigued and a little apprehensive, Sophia went to the office. Upon entering, she found not only Mr. Holloway, but also a man she didn't recognize. Tall, with gray hair and a white coat, he had a presence that immediately inspired confidence. "Ah, Sophia, please come in, Mr. Holloway welcomed her with a warm smile. "I'd like you to meet Dr. Nathan Blackwell. He's one of the country's leading specialists in cystic fibrosis." Sophia felt her legs go weak. Dr. Blackwell, but how? Mr. Holloway laughed softly. "Let's just say I made a few calls last night. Dr. Blackwell is an old friend, and when he heard about your brother's situation, he made a point of coming personally." Dr. Blackwell extended his hand, greeting Sophia with a firm shake. "Ms. Ramirez, it's a pleasure to meet you. Charles has told me a little about your brother's condition. I'd very much like to examine him, if you agree." Sophia nodded, still stunned. "Of course, doctor. That would be wonderful. But when and where?" "How about today?" Mr. Holloway suggested. "Sophia, you can take the day off. Dr. Blackwell can accompany you home to examine your brother. That is, if it's not too much trouble." "Not at all," Sophia exclaimed, feeling a surge of emotion. "It would be perfect. Marco will be so surprised." Dr. Blackwell smiled gently. "Excellent. I'll get my equipment and we can go. On the way, I'd like to hear more about your brother's medical history, if possible." As Sophia and Dr. Blackwell prepared to leave, Mr. Holloway stopped them for a moment. "Sophia, I want you to know that this is just the beginning. I'm committed to helping you and your brother as best I can." Sophia fought back tears. "Mr. Holloway, I don't know how to thank you." He held up a hand, gently interrupting her. "There's no need for thanks. Sometimes, all we need is a chance, and I'm happy to be able to give that to you and Marco." The drive back to Queens was surreal for Sophia. Sitting next to Dr. Blackwell in the cab, she recounted Marco's medical history, answering the doctor's questions with a mixture of hope and apprehension. When they arrived at the apartment, Marco was stunned to see Sophia returning so soon, and accompanied. "Sophie, what's going on?" Sophia quickly introduced herself, explaining the situation. Marco, initially hesitant, soon found himself involved in an in-depth conversation with Dr. Blackwell. The doctor conducted a thorough examination, asking questions and taking notes. After almost 2 hours, Dr. Blackwell concluded the examination. His face was serious, but not pessimistic. "Marco, Sophia, I'm going to be straight with you. Marco's condition is serious, but not hopeless. There are new treatments that could make a significant difference to his quality of life." Sophia held Marco's hand, feeling him tremble slightly. "What kind of treatments, doctor?" "There's a new gene therapy that has shown promising results in cases like Marco's," explained Dr. Blackwell. "In addition, a regimen of intensive physiotherapy and appropriate medication can greatly improve his lung function." Marco looked at Sophia, his eyes shining with a mixture of fear and hope. That sounds incredible, but it must be very expensive, right?" Dr. Blackwell exchanged a glance with Sophia before answering. "Normally, yes, but Mr. Holloway has already informed me that all the costs will be covered. You don't need to worry about that." Sophia felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. Mr. Holloway's generosity was beyond anything she could have imagined. Dr. Blackwell, that's too much. How can we accept something like this? The doctor smiled gently. Sophia, in my career, I've learned that sometimes the universe conspires in our favor. Mr. Holloway has his reasons for helping, and I believe we should accept that help with gratitude. Marco, who had been quiet, finally spoke. What if it doesn't work? What if it's too late for me? Dr. Blackwell placed a comforting hand on Marco's shoulder. Marco, in medicine, we never make promises. But I can promise you this, we will do everything we can to improve your condition. You're young and, despite your illness, you still have a lot of strength. We have every reason to be optimistic. The doctor's words hung in the air, full of possibilities. Sophia looked at her brother, seeing in him a glimpse of the energetic boy he used to be before the disease consumed him. So, what happens now? Sophia asked, her voice barely containing her emotion. Now, replied Dr. Blackwell, we start fighting. I'll prepare a detailed treatment plan and we'll schedule the first therapy session as soon as possible. Marco, are you ready for this? Marco looked at Sophia, then at the doctor. His face lit up with a determination that Sophia hadn't seen for years. Yes, doctor, I'm ready. As Dr. Blackwell prepared to leave, making the final arrangements with Sophia, she couldn't help but notice the change in the atmosphere of the small apartment. Where once there had been an atmosphere of quiet resignation, there now pulsed an energy of hope and possibility. Sophia knew that the road ahead would be difficult. The treatment would be long and challenging. But for the first time in a long time, she felt that they had a real chance. A chance of life, of health, of a future. When the door closed behind Dr. Blackwell, Sophia turned to Marco. Wordlessly, the siblings embraced, letting the tears of relief and hope flow freely. Tomorrow was still uncertain, but now it finally looked promising. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity for Sophia and Marco. The treatment plan drawn up by Dr. Blackwell was intense and demanding, but the Ramirez siblings were determined to face each challenge with courage and optimism. On a cool fall morning, Sophia woke up earlier than usual. Today would be the day of Marco's first gene therapy session, and anxiety kept her on her toes throughout the night. She got up quietly, not wanting to disturb her brother's sleep. In the kitchen, while preparing a strong coffee, Sophia reflected on the dramatic changes that had taken place in their lives over the last few weeks. Mr. Holloway's generosity continued to amaze her. Not only was he covering all the medical costs, but he had also insisted that Sophia reduce her working hours so that she could accompany Marco to his treatments, without any reduction in her salary. Good morning, Sophie. Marco's voice brought her out of her thoughts. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, looking nervous but determined. Big day today, huh? Sophia smiled, trying to convey a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Yes, it's a great day. How are you feeling? Marco shrugged, taking a seat at the table. Nervous, excited, scared, all at the same time, I guess. Sophia placed a cup of tea in front of him, along with his morning medication. It's normal to feel this way, but remember what Dr. Blackwell said, this treatment has shown very promising results. I know, Marco sighed, taking his medicine. It's just that, what if it doesn't work, Sophie? What if after all this, I still... Hey, Sophia interrupted him gently, holding his hand. Let's not think like that. Let's take it one day at a time, okay? Today, our focus is on getting to the hospital and starting treatment. The rest we'll deal with as it happens. Marco nodded, squeezing his sister's hand. You're right. As always, he smiled faintly. I don't know what I'd do without you, Sophie. Sophia's heart squeezed at her brother's words. We're a team, remember? We'll always be in this together. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Just as they were about to leave, Sophia's phone rang. It was Mr. Holloway. Sophia, good morning? His voice sounded warm even through the phone. I just wanted to wish you and Marco good luck today. Remember, if you need anything, just let me know." Sophia felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway. Your help means more than we can express." "There's no need for thanks," he replied softly. "Oh, and Sophia, when I get back, I'd like to talk to you about something important. But don't worry about that now. Focus on Marco's treatment." Intrigued, Sophia agreed and hung up. What would Mr. Holloway want to discuss? She pushed the question from her mind, concentrating on the immediate task, getting Marco to the hospital. The New York Medical Center was an imposing complex, a mixture of old and modern buildings that rose against the city sky. Sophia and Marco were greeted at the entrance by a smiling nurse. "You must be the Ramirezes," she said warmly. "I'm Nurse Lisa. I'll be accompanying you throughout the process today." As they followed the nurse through the hospital corridors, Sophia noticed that Marco was getting more and more tense. She held his hand, offering silent support. Dr. Blackwell was waiting for them in the treatment room, his face lighting up at the sight of them. "Marco, Sophia, good to see you. Are you ready to start?" Marco took a deep breath before answering. "I think so, doctor. What exactly is going to happen?" The doctor explained the procedure in detail, using simple terms to make sure they both understood. Gene therapy involved introducing healthy genes into Marco's cells to help correct the genetic defect that caused his cystic fibrosis. "I'm not going to lie, Marco," Dr. Blackwell concluded. "The treatment can be uncomfortable and you may feel tired afterwards, but we're here to help every step of the way." Sophia watched as Marco was prepared for treatment, her heart clenching as she saw the fear in her brother's eyes. "Can I stay with him?" she asked the doctor. "Of course," Dr. Blackwell smiled gently. "In fact, I think it would be great for Marco to have you around." The next few hours were a mixture of anxiety and hope. Sophia held Marco's hand throughout the procedure, talking softly to him to keep him distracted. She told him stories from her childhood, recalling happy times that seemed so far away now. When the treatment was finally over, Marco was exhausted, but his eyes shone with a new determination. "We did it, Sophie," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "The first step." Dr. Blackwell seemed pleased with the progress. "You were very brave today, Marco. Now, the important thing is to rest and strictly follow the aftercare plan I'm going to give you." As they prepared to leave, Sophia noticed a man standing in the corridor, watching them. He looked familiar, but she couldn't remember where she knew him from. When their gazes met, the man smiled slightly and walked away quickly. Back in the apartment, Sophia helped Marco settle into his bed. "Get some rest," she said, tucking the blankets around him. "I'll prepare something light for you to eat later." While Marco slept, Sophia finally had a moment to process everything that had happened. Mr. Holloway's call came back to her mind. What did he want to discuss? And who was that man in the hospital? Deciding that there was no point in speculating, Sophia concentrated on looking after Marco. The next few days would be crucial for his recovery, and she was determined to do everything she could to help him. A few days later, with Marco recovering well at home, Sophia returned to work at the Holloway mansion. She was nervous, wondering what Mr. Holloway wanted to discuss. When she arrived, she was immediately directed to his office. Mr. Holloway welcomed her with a warm smile, but Sophia noticed a certain tension in his eyes. "Sophia, please sit down," he said, indicating a comfortable armchair. "How is Marco?" "He's recovering well, Mr. Holloway," Sophia replied, feeling a little more relaxed. "We can't thank you enough for everything you've done for us." Mr. Holloway waved his hand, dismissing the thanks. "Sophia, there's something I need to tell you. Something that explains why I decided to help you and your brother." Sophia felt her heart race. "What is it, Mr. Holloway?" He took a deep breath before continuing. "Many years ago, I had a younger brother. His name was Michael, and he also suffered from cystic fibrosis." Sophia was speechless, her mind trying to process this new information. "Michael was brilliant, full of life," Mr. Holloway continued, his voice laced with emotion. "But back then, treatments weren't as advanced as they are today. We lost him when he was only 20. "Oh, Mr. Holloway," Sophia murmured, feeling tears forming in her eyes. I'm so sorry. He smiled sadly. It was a long time ago. But when I heard about Marco, when I saw how dedicated you are to looking after him, well, it touched something in me. I saw in you the same determination you had to help Michael. Sophia finally understood. Mr. Holloway's generosity, his interest in helping, it all made sense now. There's one more thing, Sophia, Mr. Holloway continued. Do you remember the man you saw in the hospital? The one who was watching you? Sophia nodded, remembering the familiar stranger. That was my son, Andrew, Mr. Holloway revealed. He hasn't coped well with hospitals since we lost Michael, but he wanted to be there, somehow, to support you. The revelations left Sophia stunned. She had always seen Mr. Holloway as a distant figure, a benevolent employer, but now she saw a man who carried his own pain, his own struggles. Mr. Holloway, I don't know what to say, Sophia finally managed to say. He smiled gently. There's nothing to say, Sophia. I just wanted you to understand why this is so important to me. Seeing Marco get better, seeing you get the chance I didn't have with Michael, it means a lot. Sophia felt a new wave of emotion run through her. Mr. Holloway's generosity wasn't just an act of charity, it was a way of honoring her brother's memory, of making the difference he hadn't been able to make in the past. Thank you for sharing this with me, Sophia said softly. I promise we'll make the best possible use of this opportunity you've given us. Mr. Holloway nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I know you will, Sophia. And know that, no matter what happens, you two will always have my support. When Sophia left the office that day, she felt different. The weight of responsibility was still there, but now it was accompanied by an even greater sense of purpose. She and Marco weren't just fighting for themselves. They were carrying the hopes and dreams of others who had come before them. On the way home, Sophia reflected on how unpredictable life could be. A month ago, she had been on the brink of despair, fearing for Marco's life and their future. Now, although the challenges were still great, there was hope. There was a support network she had never imagined possible. When she entered the apartment and saw Marco smiling at her from the living room, Sophia felt a wave of renewed determination. They had a long road ahead of them, but now she knew they weren't alone on this journey. With Mr. Holloway's support, Dr. Blackwell's experience, and the love they shared, they would face each obstacle one day at a time. How was work? Marco asked, noticing something different about his sister's face. Sophia smiled, taking a seat next to him. It was revealing, she replied. We have a lot to talk about, Marco. But first, tell me how you're feeling today. As Marco began to talk about his day, Sophia felt a peace she hadn't experienced for years. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. Hope not just for Marco's recovery, but for a future where they could finally live, not just survive. Autumn in New York brought with it a change in the air, not just in temperature, but also in the lives of Sophia and Marco Ramirez. As the leaves on the trees in Central Park began to take on golden and reddish hues, the siblings experienced their own transformations. It was a Saturday morning when Sophia woke up to the unusual sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. Intrigued, she got up and walked silently down the corridor. The scene she encountered made her heart leap. Marco, still in his pajamas, was standing in front of the stove, trying to flip a pancake in the air. "Careful!" Sophia exclaimed, half laughing, half worried, as she saw the pancake almost fall to the floor. Marco turned around, a broad smile lighting up his face. "Morning, sleepyhead. I thought I'd make breakfast today. Surprise." Sophia was momentarily speechless. For weeks, Marco had barely had the energy to get out of bed, and now he was there, cooking and laughing as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Marco, this is incredible," she finally managed to say, feeling tears of joy forming in her eyes. "How are you feeling?" "Better than I felt in a long time," he replied, placing the pancake, a little tart, but perfectly golden, on a plate. "I can't explain it, Sophie. It's as if I could breathe properly for the first time in years." Sophia moved closer, hugging her brother tightly. She could feel the difference. Marco's body, once fragile and tense, now seemed stronger, more relaxed. "The treatment is working," she murmured, more to herself than to Marco. "It seems so," Marco agreed, returning the hug. "I still have a long way to go, but I'm starting to believe that I can really get better." They sat down to breakfast together, enjoying not only the pancakes, which were surprisingly good, but also the moment of normality that had eluded them for so long. "So," Marco began between mouthfuls, "I've been thinking, I think I want to go back to school." Sophia almost choked on her coffee. "Really? Marco, that's wonderful. Do you have any idea what you want to do?" Marco nodded, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Remember how I always liked drawing? I've been looking into graphic design courses. I think I could do that, even on days when I don't feel so well." Sophia felt a surge of pride and excitement. Seeing Marco making plans for the future, something he had stopped doing so long ago, was more than she could have hoped for a few weeks ago. "Let's make it happen," she said, determined. "We can research online courses, see what works best with your treatment. I'm sure Mr. Holloway will be happy to help us if we need it." The mention of Mr. Holloway brought up the revelations of the previous week. Sophia still hadn't told Marco about her benefactor's past, about the brother he had lost to the same disease that afflicted Marco. "Marco," she began, hesitantly, "there's something I need to tell you about Mr. Holloway." Over the next few minutes, Sophia shared everything she had learned. Marco listened in silence, his eyes widening with surprise and then softening with understanding. "Wow," he finally said, "that explains a lot. It must be hard for him to see us go through that." Sophia nodded. "I guess, in a way, helping us is a way for him to honor his brother's memory." Marco was thoughtful for a moment. "You know, Sophie, I think we should do something for him. To say thank you, you know." "Like what?" "I don't know yet," Marco admitted. "But I'll think of something. He deserves to know how much of a difference he's made to our lives." The rest of the day passed in a blur of previously unthinkable activities. Marco insisted on taking a walk in the nearby park, something he hadn't done for months. Sophia watched him with a mixture of joy and apprehension, always on the lookout for any sign of excessive tiredness. On Sunday, Sophia received an unexpected call from Dr. Blackwell. "Sophia, good morning." The doctor's voice sounded cheerful. "I've been reviewing Marco's latest tests and the results are very promising. I'd like to make an appointment to discuss the next steps in his treatment." Sophia's heart raced at the news. "Of course, doctor. When would be good for you?" They made the appointment for the following Tuesday. Sophia couldn't wait to share the news with Marco. On Monday, when she arrived at the Holloway mansion for work, Sophia was surprised by a tense atmosphere. Mrs. Holloway, normally cold and distant, seemed particularly agitated. "Sophia," she called out, her voice more strident than usual. "Charles wants to see you in the office right away." Worried, Sophia headed for Mr. Holloway's office. Upon entering, she found not only her employer, but also a man she recognized as Andrew, Mr. Holloway's son, whom she had seen briefly at the hospital. "Sophia, please come in." Mr. Holloway welcomed her, his tone serious. "There's something important we need to discuss." Sophia sat down, feeling suddenly anxious. "Has something happened, Mr. Holloway?" Mr. Holloway exchanged a glance with Andrew before continuing. "Sophia, over the last few months, I've been thinking a lot about the future, about legacies and about making a difference in people's lives." He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. "I've decided to set up a foundation, an organization dedicated to helping families affected by cystic fibrosis, offering financial support and access to cutting-edge treatments." Sophia felt her heart race. "That's incredible, Mr. Holloway. It's going to help so many people." "Yes," he agreed, a small smile forming on his lips. "And that's where you come in, Sophia. I'd like to invite you to be part of this foundation, to help run it. In fact..." Sophia was stunned, unable to fully process what she was hearing. "Me? But I have no experience with anything like this. I'm just a maid." It was Andrew who spoke this time, his voice gentle but firm. "You're much more than that, Sophia. You have first-hand experience of the challenges these families face. Your dedication to your brother, your strength, that's exactly what this foundation needs." Mr. Holloway nodded in agreement. "What's more, Sophia, you have a huge heart and incredible determination. These are qualities that can't be taught. The rest we can help you learn." Sophia felt as if the world was spinning around her. It was an opportunity beyond her wildest dreams, a chance to not only change her own life, but to make a difference to other families like hers. I don't know what to say," she finally managed to articulate. "It's a huge honor, Mr. Holloway, but what about my job here? What about Marco?" "Your priority will always be Marco," Mr. Holloway assured her. "The work at the foundation will be flexible, allowing you to continue looking after him. As for your work here, well, consider it a promotion." Andrew leaned forward, his eyes full of empathy. "Sophia, we know it's a big change. You don't have to decide now. Think about it. Talk to Marco. We want you to feel totally comfortable with the decision." Sophia nodded, feeling a mixture of emotions, excitement, fear, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of possibility. "Thank you," she said, her voice laced with emotion. "I'll think about it carefully and talk to Marco. That could change everything." "That's the idea." Mr. Holloway smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Sometimes, Sophia, life presents us with opportunities to turn our pain into something positive. This is our chance, mine, yours, Andrew's, to do just that." Leaving the office that day, Sophia felt like she was walking on a cloud. The possibilities opening up before her were both exciting and frightening. She couldn't wait to share the news with Marco. Arriving home, she found her brother sitting in the living room, surrounded by books and brochures on graphic design courses. At the sight of her, Marco looked up, a broad smile on his face. "Sophie, you won't believe it. I've found the perfect course. It's online, but there are some face-to-face workshops here in New York. And look," he held up a drawing. "I started practicing today." Sophia felt tears of joy forming in her eyes. Seeing Marco so excited, so full of life and plans for the future, was more than she could have hoped for a few weeks ago. "This is wonderful, Marco," she said, taking a seat next to him. "And I have news to share, too." As Sophia recounted her conversation with Mr. Holloway and Andrew, she saw Marco's eyes widen with surprise and then light up with pride. "Sophie, this is incredible," he exclaimed when she had finished. "You have to accept it. Think of how many people you could help." "But what about you, Marco? My priority will always be to look after you." Marco took his sister's hands in his. "And you'll continue to look after me. But Sophie, you deserve this. You deserve the chance to do more, to be more. You've sacrificed so much for me. It's time you had the chance to fulfill your dreams too." Sophia felt her heart fill with love and gratitude for her brother. "Let's do it together then," she said. "You with your studies, me with the foundation, a new phase for both of us." That night, as Sophia prepared for bed, she reflected on how life could change so quickly. Just a few months ago, she had been on the brink of despair, fearing for Marco's future and struggling to keep her head above water. Now, they were on the brink of a new adventure, full of possibilities and hope. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. Marco's treatment was still long, and taking on a new role in the foundation would be challenging. But for the first time in a long time, Sophia felt truly optimistic about the future. As she closed her eyes, a soft smile played on her lips. Tomorrow would be a new day, full of promise and possibilities, and she couldn't wait to see what it would bring. Winter had arrived in New York, covering the city in a white blanket of snow. For Sophia and Marco Ramirez, however, the season brought not only changes in the weather, but also a series of new beginnings and challenges. Sophia looked out of the window of the newly opened office of the Holloway Foundation for Cystic Fibrosis Research and Support, watching the snowflakes fall gently on the busy streets of Manhattan. It had been exactly a month since she had accepted Mr. Holloway's offer to join the foundation, and each day brought with it a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Sophia? Andrew Holloway's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. The meeting with the researchers is about to start. Are you ready? Sophia took a deep breath, adjusting her new blazer, a piece that still made her feel a little uncomfortable, so different from the simple clothes she usually wore. Yes, I'm coming. As they walked together to the conference room, Andrew smiled encouragingly. You'll do fine. Remember, your experience is invaluable to this team. Sophia nodded, grateful for Andrew's constant support. Over the last few weeks, he had become not just a colleague, but a friend, always ready to guide her through the intricacies of the corporate and philanthropic world. The meeting was intense, with scientists and doctors discussing the latest advances in cystic fibrosis research. Sophia, initially hesitant, was surprised to discover that she had a lot to contribute. Her personal experience with Marco brought a unique perspective that the researchers valued immensely. Excellent work, Sophia. Mr. Holloway congratulated her after the meeting. Your suggestion about including emotional support therapies in the treatment program was brilliant. Sophia blushed slightly at the compliment. Thank you, Mr. Holloway. I just thought of what would have helped Marco and me during the most difficult times. Mr. Holloway nodded, a glint of pride in his eyes. That's exactly why you're so valuable to this foundation. You understand, in a way that many of us can't, what these families really need. As she walked back to her desk, Sophia couldn't help thinking about how drastically her life had changed. Just a few months ago, she was cleaning this very room, and now she was helping to make decisions that could impact the lives of countless people. Her phone vibrated, bringing her back to the present. It was a message from Marco. Guess who just delivered his first design project? This guy here. Sophia smiled broadly, feeling a surge of pride. Marco had dedicated himself intensely to his graphic design course, finding a new passion that helped him cope with the most difficult days of his treatment. Incredible, little brother. I can't wait to see it. Let's celebrate tonight. She could hardly believe Marco's transformation. Although he still had difficult days, the improvement in his health was remarkable. Dr. Blackwell was optimistic, saying that the new treatment was showing promising results. At the end of the day, as she was preparing to leave, Sophia received an unexpected visitor. It was Mrs. Holloway, a figure she had rarely seen since leaving her post as a domestic servant. Sophia, dear, Mrs. Holloway began, her tone surprisingly warm. May I have a word with you? Intrigued and a little apprehensive, Sophia nodded. Of course, Mrs. Holloway. The older woman hesitated for a moment before continuing. I wanted to apologize for the way I treated you when you were working in our house. I didn't understand at the time how much you were going through. Sophia was stunned. This was a side of Mrs. Holloway she had never seen before. Seeing you here, doing such important work, Mrs. Holloway continued, made me realize how wrong I was in my judgments. You're a remarkable young woman, Sophia. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, Sophia replied, touched. That means a lot to me. As she walked to the subway, Sophia reflected on how far she had come, not just in her career, but in her personal growth. She felt stronger, more confident, ready to face any challenge that came her way. At home, she found Marco in the kitchen, trying, with varying degrees of success, to prepare dinner. Hey, Chef Marco, she joked, giving him a hug. What's on the menu today? Marco laughed, gesturing dramatically to a steaming pot. Pasta alla Marco, or at least that was the intention. Sophia looked at the contents of the pot, which looked more like a shapeless mass than any kind of recognizable pasta. Well, she said, trying to hold back her laughter, I'm sure the taste makes up for the appearance. They laughed together, a sound that was becoming increasingly common in their small apartment. As they sat down to eat, after ordering a pizza, admitting culinary defeat, Marco showed Sophia his design project. It's for a cystic fibrosis awareness campaign, he explained, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. I thought we could use it in the foundation, if you like it. Sophia examined the design, impressed by the creativity and emotional depth of Marco's work. It's beautiful, Marco. I'm sure Mr. Holloway will love it. Marco smiled, but then his face turned serious. You know, Sophie, I've been thinking, I want to do more Not just designs, but maybe I could share my story to help other people who are going through what we went through. Sophia felt her heart fill with pride and love for her brother. I think it's a wonderful idea, Marco. Your journey can inspire many people. They spent the rest of the evening discussing ideas, dreaming of the possibilities that the future could bring. Sophia was surprised to realize that, for the first time in years, they were making plans that went beyond the next doctor's appointment or the next bill to pay. The next morning, Sophia arrived at the office full of energy, eager to share Marco's ideas with the team. She had barely sat down when Andrew appeared, looking agitated. "Sophia, you need to see this," he said, placing a newspaper on her desk. The headline made her heart stop. Pharmaceutical company announces revolutionary breakthrough in cystic fibrosis treatment. With her hands trembling slightly, Sophia read the article. A new drug, still in the testing phase, was showing unprecedented results in reversing the damage caused by cystic fibrosis. Is that real?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. Andrew nodded, a broad smile on his face. "Very real. And guess what? The Holloway Foundation has been invited to take part in the next phase of clinical trials." Sophia felt like the world was spinning. This could change everything. For Marco, for all the families she had talked to over the last few weeks, for thousands of people around the world. "We need to act fast," Andrew continued. "Dad wants us to form a team to oversee our participation in the tests. And he wants you to lead that team, Sophia." Sophia blinked in surprise. "Me? But there are so many more qualified people." Andrew shook his head. "No one understands better than you what this means for patients and their families. You're the perfect choice." As Andrew explained the details, Sophia felt a mixture of emotions wash over her. Fear, excitement, hope, everything mixed together in a whirlwind in her chest. She thought of Marco, of how this new drug could change her life. She thought of all the other Sophias and Marcos out there, fighting this relentless disease every day, and then she knew what she had to do. "I accept," she said, her voice firm and determined. "Let's make it happen." The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and planning. Sophia barely had time to breathe, let alone fully process the magnitude of what was happening. It was only when she finally arrived home, exhausted but elated, that reality hit her completely. Marco was on the sofa watching TV when she walked in. "Marco," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I have some news. Big news." As she recounted the day's events, she saw Marco's eyes widen, first with surprise, then with cautious hope. "So, could this really cure me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia sat down next to him, taking his hands in hers. "It's possible. There's still a lot of work to be done, a lot of tests, but yes, there is that possibility." Marco was silent for a long moment, processing the information. Then, to Sophia's surprise, he started to laugh. It was a laugh of joy, of relief, of all the emotions they had repressed for so long. Sophia joined him, and soon they were both laughing and crying at the same time, cuddled up on the small sofa in their apartment. "You know," Marco finally said, wiping away his tears, "I think I finally understand what you meant about having hope, even when everything seemed impossible." Sophia smiled, feeling her heart fill with love for her brother. Hope is powerful, isn't it? It brought us here. That night, as Sophia prepared for bed, she reflected on the incredible journey they had been on. From a desperate maid to a leader in an important foundation, from a sick brother to a young artist full of dreams, they had come so far. And yet, she knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be full of challenges, ups and downs. But now, for the first time, Sophia felt that they were truly equipped to face whatever came their way. With a smile, she closed her eyes, looking forward to what tomorrow would bring. The future, once so dark and uncertain, now shone with endless possibilities. And she couldn't wait to explore them, one day at a time, alongside her brother and all the incredible people who had come into their lives. Spring arrived in New York, bringing with it not only the blooming of flowers in the city's parks, but also a wave of changes and challenges for Sofia and Marco Ramirez. The Holloway Foundation office was buzzing with activity. Sofia, now fully immersed in her leadership role in the clinical trials team, barely had time to breathe. Piles of reports, endless emails, and constant meetings filled her days. "Sofia, we have a problem," Andrew said, rushing into her office one morning. His normally calm face was tense with worry. Sofia felt her stomach sink. "What happened?" Andrew placed a report on his desk. "The preliminary results of the new drug are not as promising as we had hoped." Sofia flipped quickly through the document, her heart racing with every page. The data showed that although the drug had positive effects in some patients, in others the results were insignificant or even negative. "This can't be right," she muttered, more to herself than to Andrew. "I need to talk to the research team immediately." The next few hours were a whirlwind of emergency meetings and heated discussions. Scientists fiercely debated the possible reasons for the unexpected results, while executives from the partner pharmaceutical company pressed for quick answers. In the midst of the chaos, Sofia's phone rang. It was Marco. "Sophie, are you all right? It seems like days since we last spoke." Marco's worried voice sounded on the other end of the line. Sofia felt a wave of guilt. With all the work at the foundation, she had hardly seen her brother in the last few weeks. "Marco, I'm sorry. Things have been crazy around here. How are you feeling?" There was a pause before Marco answered. "Actually, not too well. I think I've caught the flu or something. I've got a fever and my breathing's a bit difficult." Sofia's heart froze. With cystic fibrosis, even a simple cold could be dangerous. "Marco, you need to go to the hospital right away. I'll call Dr. Blackwell and—" "Sophie, calm down," Marco interrupted her. "I've already spoken to Dr. Blackwell. He's coming to see me at home. Don't worry, okay? I know you're busy with important things." Sofia closed her eyes, feeling torn between her responsibilities at the foundation and her concern for Marco. "I'll come by as soon as I can, I promise. Keep me informed, please." After hanging up, Sofia found herself momentarily paralyzed. On the one hand, the crisis with the clinical trials that could affect thousands of patients. On the other, her brother, potentially facing a serious relapse. "Sofia?" Andrew's voice brought her back to reality. "Is everything all right?" She took a deep breath, making a decision. "Andrew, I need you to take charge of the meetings for today. My brother isn't well. I have to go and see him." Andrew nodded, understanding. "Of course. Go. I'll take care of everything here. Keep me informed about Marco." Sofia ran home, her heart beating fast the whole way. When she arrived, she found Dr. Blackwell coming out of the apartment. "Dr. Blackwell, how is he?" The doctor smiled gently, but Sofia could see the concern in his eyes. "It's a lung infection, Sofia. I'm not going to lie. It's serious. We need to monitor him closely. If his fever doesn't go down in the next 24 hours, we'll have to hospitalize him." Sofia felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under her feet. After months of progress, this felt like a cruel twist of fate. Inside the apartment, she found Marco lying on the sofa, pale and panting. "Hey, Sophie," he said weakly, trying to smile. "Sorry for ruining your day at work." Sofia knelt beside him, holding his hand. "Don't talk nonsense. You're my #1 priority, always." In the days that followed, Sofia divided her time between looking after Marco at home and remotely managing the crisis at the foundation. Nights were spent at her brother's bedside, monitoring his temperature and helping him with his breathing exercises. A week later, exhausted but determined, Sofia was taking part in a crucial video call with the research team when her phone vibrated with a message from Andrew. "I think we've found something. Come to the office as soon as you can." Sofia looked at Marco, who finally seemed to be getting better. "Go," he said, noticing her hesitation. "I'll be fine for a few hours, that's important." At the office, Andrew welcomed her with a tired but hopeful smile. "Sofia, take a look at this," he said, handing her a new report. As she read it, Sofia felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. The team had discovered that the drug was most effective when combined with a specific physiotherapy treatment. Patients who followed this combined protocol showed significant improvements. Incredible, Sophia whispered, hardly daring to believe it. It's a breakthrough, Andrew agreed. But now comes the hard part. We need to redesign the entire study to incorporate this new approach. It will take time, and investors are getting impatient. Sophia nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. We'll make it happen, she said, determined. For Marco and for all the other patients waiting for a cure. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Sophia worked tirelessly, dividing her time between the foundation and caring for Marco, who was fortunately recovering well. It was during a particularly stressful afternoon when Sophia was about to give up in the face of yet another bureaucratic obstacle that she received an unexpected visitor. "Mrs. Holloway," Sophia exclaimed, surprised to see the elegant woman standing in the doorway of her living room. Mrs. Holloway entered, her normally stern face softened by a gentle smile. "Sophia, dear, Charles told me about all the challenges you've been facing. I've come to see how I can help." Sophia blinked, confused. "Help? I don't understand." Mrs. Holloway sat down, her eyes shining with a determination that Sophia had never seen before. "Sophia, I spent years watching from afar as Charles devoted himself to philanthropic causes. I always thought it wasn't my place to get involved. But seeing you here, fighting not just for your brother but for so many others, well, it made me realize that it's time I did my bit." Over the next few minutes, Missy Holloway outlined a plan to use her social contacts and influence to raise awareness and financial support for cystic fibrosis research. Sophia listened in amazement as ideas for fundraising events and media campaigns took shape. "Mrs. Holloway, this is incredible," Sophia said, overwhelmed. "I can't thank you enough." The older woman smiled, taking Sophia's hand. "There's no need for thanks. It's time to make a difference together." With Mrs. Holloway's renewed support and the team's tireless work, things began to change. The new treatment protocol was approved for expanded testing, and the preliminary results were promising. One afternoon, while Sophia was working in her office, there was a knock on her door. It was Marco, looking healthier than she had seen him in years. "Marco, what are you doing here?" He smiled, entering the room with a large envelope in his hands. "I have a surprise for you, Sophie." Marco opened the envelope, revealing a series of beautiful and exciting designs. "It's a whole campaign for the foundation," he explained proudly, "to raise awareness about cystic fibrosis and the new treatment." Sophia looked through the designs, amazed at the creativity and emotional depth of Marco's work. "This is incredible, Marco, really incredible. And there's more," Marco continued, his eyes shining with excitement. "I've been accepted for an internship at a design agency. They loved my portfolio, especially the work related to cystic fibrosis." Sophia felt tears of joy forming in her eyes. Seeing Marco not only healthy, but pursuing his dreams, was more than she had ever dared to hope for. "I'm so proud of you," she said, hugging him tightly. At that moment, Andrew rushed into the room, his face lit up with a huge smile. "Sophia, Marco, you have to see this." He turned on the TV on the office wall, tuning into a news channel. The headline made Sophia's heart stop. "Revolutionary breakthrough in cystic fibrosis treatment. New tests show promising results." As they watched the report, which detailed the positive results of the expanded tests and the crucial role of the Holloway Foundation, Sophia felt a wave of emotions go through her. Joy, relief, pride, all mixed together in her chest. "We did it, Sophie," Marco whispered, holding his sister's hand. "We really did it." Sophia looked at her brother, at Andrew, and at the smiling faces of her team who were beginning to gather around the TV. She thought of all the sleepless nights, all the tears shed, all the moments of doubt and fear. "Yes," she replied, her voice laced with emotion. "We did it. All of us." That night, as Sophia walked home with Marco, the streets of New York seemed different, brighter, more full of possibilities. She knew there was still a long road ahead. The treatment still needed to undergo more tests. There were production and distribution issues to resolve, and countless other challenges on the horizon. But for the first time, Sophia felt that they really had a chance of winning this battle. Not just for Marco, but for all the Sophias and Marcos around the world. When they arrived home, Marco turned to her, his face serious. "You know, Sophie, I've been thinking, maybe it's time we move to a bigger place. You know, with a proper office for you and a studio for me." Sophia laughed, surprised by the suggestion. "Wow, we're getting ambitious, huh?" Marco shrugged, smiling. "Why not? I think we deserve to dream a little bigger now." Sophia looked around the small apartment that had been her home and refuge for so many years. So many memories, so many struggles and triumphs within those walls. "You know what?" she finally said. "I think you're right. It's time for a fresh start." As they prepared for bed, Sophia reflected on the incredible journey they had been on. From a desperate maid and a sick brother, they had transformed into a respected foundation executive and a promising artist. Most importantly, they had found hope. Hope for themselves, and hope for thousands of other people affected by cystic fibrosis. With a smile, Sophia closed her eyes, looking forward to what the future would bring. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome, but now she felt ready to face them. Together, they were stronger than any adversity. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and determination, Sophia fell asleep, dreaming of the new horizons that awaited them. Summer in New York arrived with a relentless heat wave, but for Sophia and Marco Ramirez, the hot weather was just an insignificant detail in their hectic lives, full of positive changes. Sophia woke up early on a Saturday morning, the sun already shining brightly through the curtains of her new apartment in Brooklyn. She smiled as she remembered how Marco had insisted on a place with a view of the East River. "For inspiration," he had said. And he was right. The view was breathtaking, especially at dawn. While preparing breakfast in the spacious kitchen, Sophia reflected on the last few months. The success of the expanded clinical trials had catapulted the Holloway Foundation into the international spotlight. She now found herself traveling frequently, speaking at medical conferences, and meeting with government leaders to discuss health policies. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Marco entered the kitchen, looking tired but healthy. "Good morning, little sister," he said, picking up a cup of coffee. "Ready for the big day?" Sophia nodded, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Today was the day of the official launch of the Cystic Fibrosis Awareness Campaign, with Marco's designs as the centerpiece. "I can hardly believe we've come this far," Sophia said, buttering a piece of toast. "Remember when we thought having food in the fridge was a great achievement?" Marco laughed, but his eyes were serious. "Every day, Sophie. That's why we can't stop now. There are still so many people who need help." Sophia felt a surge of pride for her brother. Marco had become not only a talented designer, but a passionate advocate for the cause of cystic fibrosis. His internship at the design agency had turned into a full-time job, and he devoted much of his free time to working on projects for the foundation. "Speaking of helping others," Sophia began, hesitantly, "there's something I want to discuss with you." Marco raised an eyebrow, curious. "What is it?" Sophia took a deep breath. "The foundation wants to expand its family support program. They want me to lead a new global initiative. That would mean more travel, more responsibilities." "But that's what you want, isn't it?" Marco asked, knowing his sister well. Sophia nodded slowly. "It's an incredible opportunity to make a difference on a larger scale. But you're worried about me," Marco added, smiling softly. "Sophie, you need to stop worrying so much. I'm fine, better than fine, actually. And a big part of that is thanks to you and all your hard work." He stood up, hugging his sister. "It's time for you to fly, Sophie. I'll be right here, cheering you on and doing my bit." Sophia felt tears forming in her eyes. "When did you get so wise, huh?" Marco laughed. "Probably sometime between the third and fourth hospitalizations, or maybe it was all that medication." They laughed together, the sound echoing through the sunny kitchen. It was a sound of joy, of relief, of years of tension finally dissipating. Later that day, Sophia and Marco arrived at the New York Convention Center, where the campaign launch event was about to begin. The place was packed with journalists, doctors, patients, and their families. Sophia spotted Mr. and Mrs. Holloway chatting with some dignitaries and approached them to say hello. "Sophia, darling," Mrs. Holloway exclaimed, hugging her warmly. The transformation in the relationship between the two women still surprised Sophia sometimes. "Is everything ready?" "Yes, thanks to your incredible organizational work," Sophia replied, smiling. Mr. Holloway shook Marco's hand. "Your designs are extraordinary, my boy. I'm sure they'll make a big difference in raising awareness about cystic fibrosis." Marco blushed slightly at the compliment. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway. I hope so." Andrew joined the group, looking slightly agitated. "Sophia, we have a small problem. The keynote speaker, Dr. Larson, is stuck in traffic. There may be a delay." Sophia felt a moment of panic, but took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. "Okay, we can deal with that. Let's rearrange the order of the speakers. Marco, would you mind speaking a little earlier?" Marco paled slightly. "Me? But I haven't prepared anything formal." Sophia smiled encouragingly. "Just speak from the heart, Marco. Your story, your art, that's what people need to hear." With a hesitant nod, Marco agreed. Sophia watched with pride as her brother took to the stage, his slender figure looking strangely imposing under the bright lights. "Good afternoon, everyone," Marco began, his voice shaky at first, but gaining strength as he spoke. "My name is Marco Ramirez, and I am a cystic fibrosis survivor." Silence fell over the audience as Marco shared his story. He talked about the years of struggle, about the constant fear, but also about hope, about how art became his outlet, his way of giving voice to his experience. "Each design I created for this campaign," he said, gesturing to the large banners displaying his work, "represents a part of the journey of a cystic fibrosis patient. The daily struggle, yes, but also the courage, the resilience, and above all, the hope." Sophia felt tears streaming down her face as she listened. She saw the same emotion reflected in the faces around her, in the Holloways, in Andrew, in the doctors and families in the audience. When Marco finished his speech, the room erupted in applause. Sophia saw several people wiping away tears, including some tough journalists she knew. The rest of the event went smoothly. Dr. Larson arrived in time to give her presentation on the latest advances in treatment, and Sophia gave the closing speech, outlining the Foundation's plans for the future. Later, during the reception, Sophia was approached by a woman she recognized as an important senator. "Ms. Ramirez Juritage," the senator began, "I want you to know that I was deeply touched by today's event. I would like to discuss how we can work together to improve health policies related to cystic fibrosis." Sophia felt her heart race at the possibility. "I would be honored, Senator. I have several ideas I'd like to share." While talking to the senator, Sophia saw Marco out of the corner of her eye, surrounded by a group of young cystic fibrosis patients, all eager to talk to him. He was smiling, gesturing animatedly as he spoke, probably sharing tips on how to use art as a form of therapy. At that moment, Sophia felt a wave of realization hit her. They really had come far. From a domestic worker struggling to look after her sick brother, she was now discussing health policies with a senator. And Marco, once confined to a hospital room, was now inspiring others with his art and his story. Later that evening, back at the apartment, Sophia and Marco sat on the balcony, watching the city lights. "Quite a day, huh?" Marco said, taking a sip of tea. Sophia nodded, still processing everything. "I can't believe it." "Marco, what do you think? Do you think Mom and Dad would be proud?" Marco was silent for a moment, his eyes distant. "I'm sure they would, Sophie. More than proud. They always said we were stronger together, remember?" Sophia smiled, remembering her parents. Words. "Yes, I remember. And they were right." "So," Marco said, turning to face her, "about this new global initiative. You're going to accept it, aren't you?" Sophia hesitated for a moment, but then saw the determination in her brother's eyes. "Yes," she finally said. "I think I will." Marco smiled broadly. "Good, Because I was already thinking about designs for an international campaign. Sophia laughed, feeling light and full of possibilities. Always one step ahead, huh? They sat in silence for a while, enjoying the view and each other's company. Sophia reflected on how their lives had changed, on all the people they had helped along the way, the Holloways, Dr. Blackwell, Andrew, and so many others. You know, Sophia said softly, I think I finally understand what it means to really make a difference. It's not just about grand gestures or achievements. It's about every life we touch, every person we help to have hope. Marco nodded, taking his sister's hand. And it's about never giving up, no matter how hard things get. Sophia squeezed her brother's hand, feeling grateful for everything they had overcome together. Exactly. And now, we have the chance to take that message to the world. As the night wore on, the Ramirez siblings remained on the balcony, talking about the future, making plans and dreaming big. The road ahead would still be challenging, they knew. There would be obstacles to overcome, new battles to fight. But now, they would face these challenges not only with determination, but with hope. Hope for themselves, and hope for all those still battling cystic fibrosis around the world. And as the stars shone over the city that never sleeps, Sophia and Marco knew they were exactly where they were supposed to be, doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. Together, they were changing the world, one life at a time. 5 years have passed since the launch of the Cystic Fibrosis Awareness Campaign. The time has brought profound changes not only for Sophia and Marco Ramirez, but for the entire community affected by the disease. It was a fall morning in New York, and Sophia was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting her suit. Today was a day she could hardly believe had arrived. With one last glance at her reflection, she picked up her briefcase and left the apartment. The cab took her through the busy streets of Manhattan to an imposing office building. At the entrance, a shiny sign announced, International Holloway Ramirez Foundation for Cystic Fibrosis Research and Support. Sophia smiled at the name. It was still surreal for her to see her surname there, side by side with that of the Holloways. Merging the two foundations had been a bold decision, but one that was already proving to be incredibly effective. Upon entering the lobby, Sophia was greeted by a series of familiar and new faces, staff, researchers, and volunteers, all working tirelessly for the cause that had become Sophia's life mission. Good morning, Mrs. Ramirez, the receptionist smiled. Mr. Holloway and the board are already in the conference room. Sophia thanked her and headed for the elevator. As she rode up, she couldn't help thinking about how her life had changed. From a domestic worker struggling to look after her sick brother, she was now the CEO of one of the largest medical research organizations in the world. The conference room was full when Sophia entered. Mr. Holloway, his hair now completely gray, but his eyes as lively as ever, smiled when he saw her. Sophia, how nice of you to arrive, he said, standing up to greet her. We're about to start. Sophia took her place at the head of the table, feeling the weight of everyone's expectations in the room. Today was the day they would announce the results of years of intensive research. Good morning, everyone, Sophia began, her voice firm and confident. As you know, today is a day we've all been looking forward to. Dr. Blackwell, please can you give us the latest updates? Dr. Blackwell, now the Foundation's Director of Research, stood up. His face was lit up with a smile that Sophia had rarely seen. With great pleasure, I can announce that the final results of the Phase 3 clinical trials of the combination treatment are extremely positive, he said, his voice barely containing his excitement. In 85% of cases, we saw a significant improvement in the patient's lung function and quality of life. In 60% of cases, the symptoms of cystic fibrosis were reduced to an almost undetectable level. A murmur of astonishment ran through the room. Sophia felt her heart race. This was more than they had dared to hope for. That means, she began, hardly daring to believe it. Dr. Blackwell nodded, his eyes shining. Yes, Sophia. Although we can't yet call it a cure, we are closer than ever to effectively controlling cystic fibrosis. With these results, we can move towards final approval and large-scale distribution. The room erupted in applause and congratulations. Sophia saw tears in the eyes of many around the table, including her own. Years of hard work, hope, and determination were finally paying off. When the meeting ended, Sophia found herself alone with Mr. Holloway. "Sophia," he said softly, "I don't have the words to express how proud I am of you, of what we've achieved together." Sophia smiled, feeling a surge of emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway. None of this would have been possible without you, without your vision and your support." He shook his head. "It was you who brought us this far, Sophia. Your courage, your determination. You inspired all of us to do more, to be more." Sophia thought about how it had all started, that day when Mr. Holloway had found out about Marco. "You know," she said, "I think your brother Michael would be proud too. We achieved what he didn't have the chance to see." Mr. Holloway's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," he said softly, "I think he would be." Later that day, Sophia found herself in Central Park, sitting on a familiar bench. It was the same bench where she and Marco used to sit years ago, when he only had the strength for a short walk. "Hey, little sister," a familiar voice called out. Sophia looked up and saw Marco approaching, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Marco was almost unrecognizable from the fragile young man he used to be. Now 27, he radiated health and confidence. His work as a designer had taken off, and he was now internationally recognized for his campaigns to raise awareness of chronic diseases. "So," Marco said, taking a seat next to her and handing her a coffee, "I heard you had a big meeting today." Sophia nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "It was incredible, Marco. The results are better than we could have dreamed." Marco smiled, his eyes shining. "I knew you could do it, Sophie. You've always been the stronger of the 2 of us." Sophia shook her head. "No, Marco. We're both strong. We made it together." They sat in silence for a moment, enjoying the tranquility of the park and each other's company. "You know," Marco finally said, "I've been thinking, with all this success, with treatment about to become widely available, what's next for you, Sophie?" Sophia blinked, surprised by the question. She had been so focused on getting to this point that she had barely considered what would come next. "I don't know," she admitted. "I think there will always be more work to be done, more people to help." Marco smiled. "Absolutely. But maybe it's time for you to think about yourself a bit too. You know, have a life outside of work, perhaps." Sophia laughed. "Look who's talking, Mr. Workaholic of the Year." Marco raised his hands in surrender. "Hey, I'm working on it. Actually," he hesitated for a moment, "I met someone." Sophia turned to face him, surprised and delighted. "Marco, that's wonderful. Who is she? Or him?" Marco blushed slightly. "Her name is Olivia. She's a nurse I met during one of my lectures on art therapy for chronically ill patients. She's amazing, Sophie. I think you'll love her." Sophia felt her heart fill with joy for her brother. After everything he had been through, seeing Marco happy and in love was more than she could have hoped for. "I can't wait to meet her," Sophia said sincerely. They spent the next hour talking, laughing, and reminiscing about the difficult times they had overcome together. As the sun began to set, painting the New York sky in shades of orange and pink, Sophia felt a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. "Marco," she said softly, "do you think we did it? That we made the difference we always dreamed of making?" Marco took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Sophie, look around you. Look at all the lives we've changed, all the people we've helped. Of course we've made a difference. And we will continue to do so." Sophia nodded, feeling tears of gratitude forming in her eyes. "You know, sometimes I still wake up thinking that this is all a dream, that I'll open my eyes and we'll be back in that tiny apartment, struggling to survive." Marco smiled understandingly. "I know, but it's not a dream, Sophie. It's real. We made it." As they walked back home, Sophia reflected on everything they had been through. The sleepless nights, the frightening hospitalizations, the moments of despair when it seemed there was no hope. But also the moments of joy, the small victories that had kept them going, the love and support they had found along the way. When they arrived at their building, Marco turned to Sophia. "Hey, how about a family dinner this weekend? You, me, the Holloways, Andrew, and Olivia, if you don't mind." Sophia smiled broadly. "That sounds perfect. I'll cook." Marco feigned a look of horror. "Oh no, please. Remember the last time you tried to make lasagna?" Sophia playfully punched her brother in the arm. "Hey, I've improved a lot since then, you know?" They laughed together, the sound echoing through the quiet street. It was a sound of joy, of love, of two people who had faced the worst life could offer and come out stronger on the other side. That night, lying in her bed, Sophia thought of all the cystic fibrosis patients around the world who would soon have access to the new treatment. She thought of the families who wouldn't have to go through what she and Marco went through, of the children who would be able to grow up without the constant fear that had defined Marco's childhood. And for the first time in a long time, Sophia allowed herself to dream not just of the next goal to be achieved, but of her own personal happiness. Maybe Marco was right. Maybe it was time for her to think about herself too. With a smile on her lips, Sophia closed her eyes, looking forward to what tomorrow would bring. The future, once so uncertain and frightening, now shone with endless possibilities, and she couldn't wait to explore them, one day at a time, with her brother by her side and a family of choice that had grown more than she could ever have imagined. As sleep enveloped her, Sophia felt a deep sense of gratitude for Marco, for the Holloways, for everyone who had been part of her journey. But above all, she was grateful for the strength she had found within herself, the strength to never give up, to always believe that a better tomorrow was possible. And so, with her heart full of hope and the future shining brightly before her, Sophia Ramirez fell asleep, ready to face any challenge the new day might bring, because now she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that no matter what happened, she and Marco would always have each other, and together they could overcome anything.